Hi, so this is my attempt to do as a kind of a note-taking, test-taking type topic in FYE. I chose consciousness because it's very unique and there's some interesting angles to it, and I think it concerns pretty much everybody. So when you think of consciousness, now I have dictionary definitions there, but I think of mind, soul, spirit, like my awareness of myself. But these are some of the definitions you can find in various dictionaries. The state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. She failed to regain consciousness and died 2 days later. So, I mean, most people know, like if you're under anesthesia for surgery or something, you're technically unconscious, technically. And, another definition, the awareness or perception of something by a person. Her acute consciousness of Mike's presence. Knowledge of the existence of would be another definition. The fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. It's like your self-awareness. You're aware of yourself. And that's a quote, consciousness emerges from the operations of the brain. It should say the brain. And so that's just my little intro to it. And now I'm going to go to my second slide here, the metaphysics of consciousness. Now, metaphysics is just a fancy word for the study of reality. So you have to have a word for the study of reality, as if there's anything else to study. Is there something that's not reality? But there's two main views of consciousness, and most people are on one side or the other. Some people have never thought about it, but dualism and materialism. Dualism, the word dual meaning two, meaning you have your conscious mind, you have your physical brain, and they're not the same. They interact with one another. Your physical brain is just used for surviving in the world, and your consciousness is a separate thing, and that's where the idea comes from. So, the conscious mind or a conscious mental state is non-physical. Non-physical meaning it's like independent of the brain. And that's really more of like the religious notion, the spiritual notion, the idea that, well, if it's independent of the brain, when a person dies, their consciousness continues in some sense. And one of the main things that you see, if you go to YouTube and you key near-death experiences, you're going to find a lot of these examples, because now people are putting them out. But these are like testimonies of people that have been like unconscious and stuff and have had like, experiences that are used for, I guess, quote unquote evidence that for dualism. But that's dualism. The second one is materialism. That's the opposite. The mind is the brain, or more accurately, conscious mental activity is identical with neural activity. But another way of saying is that it's produced by neural activity. So the neurons in your brain somehow, in some very complex fashion, are creating your consciousness, your awareness of self, your idea that you have this like independent existence. Now there's two different main theories are trying to explain how this happens, because if it happens, there must be a way that it happens. There must be some way that the brain can produce this consciousness. And IIT, Integrated Information Theory, and GNW, Generalized Neural Workspace. So I'll briefly introduce both of them, but what I find is it's very vague, these theories. They just don't. So integrated information theory and generalized neural workspace. So how does the brain physically produce consciousness? Then the other question is, can it be simulated by AI is another question, and meaning artificial intelligence. So dualism and materialism. So dualism tends to be very subjective, like your opinion, and it's often motivated by theology or longing for immortality. Materialism carries with it the quote-unquote hard problem of determining exactly how a conscious experience can emerge from a collection of neurons, and no one really knows that. People have toyed around with it, but so here's some references. Joseph Levine coined the expression, the explanatory gap, that there's a gap in our ability to explain the connection between physical phenomenal properties and brain properties, meaning there's a gap in how we can connect our the mechanical neurons, the operations of the brain, and your consciousness. And similarly, David Chalmers, the hard problem of consciousness. Difficult is the same thing, the difficulty of explaining just how physical processes in the brain can give rise to subjective conscious experiences. So like when you experience something like you're experiencing this talk or whatever it is you're going through, you're aware that you're hungry, you're aware that you're feeling some emotions. How exactly does that happen in your brain? And so now I'll just go through two of these things, two of the theories of materialism. And again, materialism was kind of the more scientific idea that your consciousness comes from your brain. When your brain expires, your consciousness goes too. Everything goes. So everything is just tied to your physical body, your physical brain. That's materialism. So global workspace theory. So that's the guy who came up with it. This school in Paris. And there's a little icon. Like this is, I put a source there because I didn't come up with this. That's where I got it. Consciousness is a form of information processing, like a computer. It occurs when sensory data for an experience go to a global workspace and are distributed to other centers. They say that might be in the frontal cortex. It's like a clearinghouse for all these sensory data, and then they decide where this gets sent to other centers of the brain. For what it's worth, I don't know. It doesn't really mean much to me. It didn't really resonate with me, but maybe there are more details to it. Then the next one, IIT, Integrated Information Theory. This guy, Tononi, from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, it's based on the notion of an experience. So he's saying to be conscious is to have an experience. So he's defining what an experience is, so that we can define, like, how do you have an experience? So these are the properties of an experience. They're subjective. They exist only for that conscious entity. My experience and your experience, not the same. They're structured. Their contents relate to one another. The blue book is on the table. So there's always some kind of relationship between the items and the experience. They're specific. The book is blue, it's not red. They're unified. You can only have one experience at a time. Definitive. There are bounds to what the experience contains. And so this is a little graphic here. And here they're saying that this is really more in the back of the brain. It's intrinsic to cognitive networks that exert a causal power. And the back of the brain might be the right where this occurs. So it's a network that influences itself, experiences consciousness. It influences itself. It's almost like a feedback loop, I guess. So that's that theory. And now this has to be brought up because it's so, if you look at consciousness evidence for consciousness or an afterlife, you always run into these. And it's a near-death experience, and it wouldn't surprise me if some people, who are hearing this actually know somebody who had an NDE. So it's an occurrence in which a person who's very close to dying has memories of a spiritual experience, such as meeting dead friends and family members or seeing a white light during the time when death was near. And there's elements that are very common to these NDEs, and there's variations within it. So often there's a lot of variation in terms of what they actually see, but there's these elements where you get an out-of-body experience. Often you witness events in the environment when you're technically supposed to be unconscious or brain dead. So like if you're in a hospital room, you might witness what the doctors are doing. Traveling through a tunnel. There's a tunnel that people often, sometimes encountering other deceased persons. They may be known to you or not. Encountering this loving being of light, that's people interpret it different ways. And then there's a life review, and it's typically a panoramic life review where they say you see every element of your life at once in this big panoramic vision. And then there's another element, which is timelessness, that there's no time. They say there's no time and there's no space, and words can't really describe it. So that's when people talk about this, that there really isn't any passing of time. There's no notion of that. So it's very strange, and it's hard to understand, but these are common elements of these experiences. And obviously, these are evidence for the dualistic view of consciousness. Because if you're unconscious, according to the materialistic view, you shouldn't be able to experience anything. If your brain is completely gone, not functioning, you shouldn't experience anything. But these people are apparently experiencing things. And these are some sources for these NDEs. This I will play later when I get through the slide. I don't want to play it right now. It's like a compilation of typical NDEs. Raymond Moody was the first person to coin the term NDE, or near-death experience. He's been studying it for 50 years. He collected thousands of people talking about their experiences, and this is just one book that he wrote, Life After Life. I think this is the most recent one, probably. This was the previous one, The Light Beyond. Another guy, Bruce Grayson. So if you go to YouTube and key on either of these, you'll find a lot of entries. And these are some books that he wrote. So they're pretty extensive. And this guy, Nikolai, also studied. He also studied some of the negative ones. So, okay. A couple other things. It's worth mentioning artificial intelligence, because there's always this thing underway that people think that they're going to be able to use AI or artificial intelligence to somehow simulate consciousness. Like you could somehow make a machine believe it's alive or think that it's alive. And so it's using machines, that is, computer programs, specifically AI, to simulate consciousness. So one is, there's a bunch of different people working on it. This MMP is the Mind Machine Project from MIT. And this is their definition. It seeks to develop techniques for reading, writing, and virtually simulating millions of neurons concurrently to enable interactive exploration of both individual circuits and overall brain function. They're trying to simulate the brain. So that's one of the things they are doing. It's like, well, if I can't understand how consciousness comes about, if I could simulate the brain perfectly and give it the right input, that somehow that brain would learn to become like a living being. It would actually, come alive. And they have a lot of stuff here. Like if you go to this link, Mind Machine Project, this is like a world that kind of simulates like physical objects in the world. And so you can use it to test AI programs, see if they can navigate their way around the world. Synthetic neurobiology is this idea that you can kind of melding the machine with your mind, like you could simulate neurons. And there's a lot of medical reasons you might want to do that. And then along with this, this Marvin Minsky, he wrote this book, The Emotion Machine, where he just talks about like, how would you go about trying to simulate consciousness? What are some of the ideas you would use? And there would be the link for it. So if you want, I can get you those links right now, because this is being shared and everything. I probably can't. Yeah. Well, actually, this probably would bring it up. I just don't know if. Let me see. Should I attempt this? Try to open the link. See what happens. So this is it. This is from MIT, and it's a simulator, basically. I think it was written in Python. So anybody who knows anything about programming languages, yeah, I don't know if that showed up. So I don't think that showed up. Anyway, so that's AI and consciousness. Google's DeepMind project. So that's another item. People have heard about this. This is an effort to develop very sophisticated AI that can eventually develop consciousness, can do things that, or at least can do a lot of the things that a human can do, like have emotional reactions and stuff like that. And this is just a link that this describes. They tested this software with video games. They had the software, two different instances of it, competing with each other using video games. They wanted to see if they could get it to demonstrate like human properties, and in some cases it did. And they're at deepmind.com. That's the actual link for the project. And that's just two, MIT and Google. Like there's a bunch of them. So there's an awful lot of them that are working on this stuff. And so that's my rendition of this stuff. And what I'm going to do is now I'll just play just a couple of the actual we might call it eyewitnesses, but witnesses to NDEs and them describing their experiences. Just the typical ones, and you can find thousands of them. And then I'll give you this little quiz. It's just a fun little quiz to test your knowledge. So we could say this is a test taking skills segment of FYE. So all right, so I guess that's pretty much it for now, and I will stop this video.